Hello everybody, this is ManuS and welcome to another Legends of Runeterra deck tech. I finally managed to bring you the long-awaited breakdown of the new Elusives. I've been doing quite a lot of testing on Elusives and various splashes, as you may or may not have seen if you're following me on Twitter and other social media platforms. I posted about it a bunch, and now we're gonna do a deep dive into the deck list, the very things that I tried, as well as my results and my current feelings about it. And then, of course, we'll jump into some games in currently the top 200 master to show it in action and show you how to pilot it and so on. All right, so before we dive right in, you know the drill. Hit the subscribe button down below and turn on the notification icon to not miss out on future content. And now let's take a look. All right, so a bit of a backstory to the deck. I built this list myself indirectly. Indirectly in the sense that I faced a guy named AGENT ALEKSEY on ladder, and he was playing like an almost mono Ionia deck like this. He basically was playing Druid Protector and Empyrean as top end, and Kinkou Wayfinder and a bunch of Elusives. He had 0 champions, which I was 100% sure is wrong, but basically I liked the idea of going bigger with Elusives, getting access to Wayfinder. He had Omen Hawk, that's the one Freljord card I saw, and yeah, having Protector 7-drop as sort of your new game plan, since the old Elusives was more of an aggro deck that was very racy and early game heavy, with Mentor being your main buff card, and now with Mentor weakened and Protector buffed, the deck turned into more of a mid-range card with its power towards the top end in Protector and the 7-drop. So he beat me while I was testing the Lux Heimerdinger mid-range deck from last deck tech, and I was quite impressed by it. So I immediately sat down, built my own version, which basically included Zed, because I think that's just kind of a free roll and just gives you some free win power draws. I added Elixir as the second Freljord card, because that's also kind of a no-brainer. You can usually splash up to 6 cards with Allegiance cards. I wouldn't recommend more, but 6 is usually fine if the cards are good and worth it. And Elixir is arguably the best, or at least one of the best Freljord cards, and plays really well with the deck, and has been playing really well with the deck in the past already. So yeah, that's how the deck looked. I was running 2 Empyrean, 1 Hatchling, simply because drawing multiple Empyreans doesn't do a whole lot, and Hatchling is a really powerful card. For some reason, I let myself get baited into running Empyrean at all, which was kind of dumb, and XIXO fixed that mistake later by just running straight up 3 Hatchlings and 0 Empyreans, which I since adopted and felt kind of stupid for not doing it from the get-go, especially because I was the guy that took his old Freljord Elusives in the beginning and replaced some of the Empyreans with Hatchlings. I think I was on like 1 Empyrean, 2 Hatchling when he was on like only Empyreans, because the card is just so powerful, so there's no reason to run Empyrean really. And like, sure, it's smaller and doesn't become a 9-8 with Protector, it just becomes a 7-5, but who cares? Like, it buffs your whole team, and it just, there's not even that much upside to have everything in like one big guy, because there's Vengeances and Will of Ionias and all that stuff, and Hatchling is also a lot better against that. And you want your big card to be not unnecessarily vulnerable to cards like Will of Ionia. So bouncing a Hatchling, not that big of a deal. Anyway, then I posted about the deck, posted it on the Discord, the competitive Discord that I'm on, and yeah, some people picked it up. Agigas had a win streak into rank 5, I think, with it, and really liked it. The deck became pretty popular on ladder to a point where XIXO faced it a bunch and liked what he was seeing, and then basically built his own list, which was basically the same list, because if you know how to build decks, then it's not a particularly hard deck to build properly once you get the core idea of like Protector, Wayfinder, Elusives, Midrange. The main difference that he had was 3 Will and 1 Deny and 3 Hatchling, 0 Empyrean, which I since adopted the Hatchling part. I do think, however, that the two split on Will of Ionia Deny is a lot better, and initially I actually had Spirit's Refuge over Will of Ionia because the aggro burn deck was a lot more popular back then, and Will is pretty bad against them, while Refuge gives you more of a fighting chance because the matchup is quite rough. I'm still not 100% sure on that. Will does a bunch of really good things, but Refuge is also pretty nice, and Refuge lets you protect your units while Will doesn't, and helps you in races. Yeah, it's kind of close, and currently I am on Will, but I have been going back and forth in testing on those. Anyway, fast forward to now. I have been trying multiple splashes, basically in all factions. I tried Hecarim Sparring Student as a splash, which went about as poorly as you would think. Hecarim is a really powerful card, but it doesn't really add a whole lot to the deck. Sure, you could say that about Zed, but Zed is cheaper, and in the early stage of like when you have odd token, you drop Zed, he can really run away with the game and make it really hard for the opponent to get racing against your Elusives if he has to also like block Zed, while Hecarim happens way too late at a stage where you just want to like drop Elusives to finish off the opponent, and then suddenly you have this guy that the opponent can block, and it just is awkward. Also, it makes the deck clunkier. I also tried Teemo Mystic Shot, which is about as underwhelming as it sounds. Teemo as a 1/1 is pretty so-so. He blocks worse than something like Precious Pet or Tracker. He is pretty poor in the mirror because there are a lot of Elusives that block him, and then he suddenly is just a blank. Mystic Shot is fine, but it doesn't really add anything to your plan. It has a poor cost to damage ratio in terms of like pressuring the opponent. It doesn't help your Elusive survive, and it kills a lot of stuff you don't care about unless they have like a Shadow Assassin or something. So that wasn't very great either. I did try various Demacia variants, always with Tracker and either with Dawn Speakers, Pursuit, or a combination of 2 back-to-back and a Radiant Strike. All 3 of those actually did pretty alright. Like, Tracker is a very solid 1-drop. It gets some chip damage in early occasionally. It helps you manage races either by killing one of the early pressure units, killing something like an Arachnoid Horror, for example, or a Campunk Pickpocket is a very solid deal, trading like a 1-cost unit for a 2-cost unit, and maybe even having gotten into damage before on turn 1 is pretty big. And it also helps you racing, because against opponents that have a few Elusives themselves, like Shadow Assassin or sometimes Monk, Tracker is a non-elusive that helps your Elusives in managing those, while other potential 1-drops might not, and just are non-elusives and interact with their Elusives, like for example Omen Hawk. Sure, Omen Hawk buffs your stuff, which is nice. I'll get to that in a minute. But yeah, Tracker does a whole lot in terms of not being an elusive, since it can interact with opposing Elusives or slow the opponent down, acting as cheap removal to make it more likely that you win the race, which is all you care about. The deck is all about racing. Pursuit played okay, but wasn't that great. This list is, like I said, much more top-heavy, much more backloaded, making Pursuit much less good. You're also much more in like trading and chump blocking mode because you're more mid-rangey. So you have less of a board for Pursuit. Pursuit felt very situational, and when you're fighting from behind and trying to like not die while also getting chip damage in, Pursuit is really poor. And in the situations where it's good, it often feels kind of like win more. Sure, there will sometimes be games that you just cheese out with it and stuff, but it just felt like very inflexible and not helping you a lot. And I had a fair share of situations where it just kind of was dead in my hand. Dawn Speaker was fine, but once again, the deck sometimes struggles having enough board, especially early on, while also triggering Dawn Speakers. And like if Dawn Speakers are buffing like 1 unit, that's really not that great. And the one thing that gets you a lot of units, like Wayfinder, all of these are actually not that great to buff. So also was kind of awkward there. Also, it's a bit clunky. Basically, if you take Omen Hawk and Elixir and replace it with like Tracker and Dawn Speaker, you suddenly replace a 1-cost burst spell with a 3-cost unit in a deck that has a lot of 3-cost cards already and like 6 of them units. So that was the issue with Dawn Speakers there, but like the version still felt fine. Like between the Demacia versions, I had a win rate like in the high 60% over like I think 30 games that I tested. I think I went like 7-3, 7-3, 6-4 or something like that over 30 games, which is pretty alright. And like the list felt the variants felt alright, but yeah. And the whole pump thing went fine, but once again, back to back is a bit clunky now, and like in the later stages, you have a lot to do with your mana now with 3 protectors and 3 hatchlings, and also like conspirator on protector and stuff like that, that it was a bit unwieldy, basically, since once again you're replacing like 1-cost elixir with very expensive cards. But overall, the Demacia Splash seemed like a very reasonable option as opposed to the others. Noteworthy is that I constantly have been getting very mediocre results with the actual like established Freljord version and the first version that I started and has been adopted since. Once again, by the way, big shout out to Agent Alexei. I don't know the guy. I've faced him like once since then on another deck on ladder, but pretty cool, innovative idea to adopt this form of elusive post-patch and being ultimately responsible for the whole deck being out there. I just picked up his idea, refined it, and reverse engineered and refined it, and popularized it from there. And then XIXO took his list to rank 1, and it exploded all over ladder again, and Elusives were back on top. It even made it to like the second most popular and second highest win rate deck in the first post patch data dump from Mobalytics and so on. So yeah, pretty big accomplishment. So anyway, the Freljord list, I kept tracking like 30 games or something, and I went like 40 games even. I think I went like 5-5, 5-5, 5-5, 6-4, something, so barely above. And I think there was like one other game that I remember that I won. So in the end, I was something like 22-19, which is like super underwhelming. And I kept playing that version because I felt like it should be good and it's what everyone is playing, and it shouldn't do consistently poorer than say the Demacia version, for example. But ultimately, like with 40 track games doing worse than Demacia over the 30 games, and like 3 different cards in addition to tracker splashed every time, I decided that it's probably more than just game, draw, and matchup variance, and that there has to be something else. Like I can, and my theory sort of is that Elixir actually doesn't do that much all the time. Sure, if the opponent is attacking your stuff with damage-based removal, it matters. But other than that, Elixir often like only kind of comes up on your Z, and using a card on your Z doesn't always feel right. Like I have a lot of games where just attack with a Z in the opponent, probably having a way to like kill him, but they spend mana, they spend a card, they take like 3 or 4 damage a lot of the time, because if I have a duo, that means they take like 4 damage from Z effectively, 1 from the like clone plus the 3 from the clone itself. And like if they spend say a twin disciplines, then that's great. They trade even in mana and cards and lose 4 life for that trade, which is perfect for a deck that just wants to race and has a lot of like pseudo unblockable units. And yeah, so and the buffs might end up not mattering as much as often. Like if your units are being killed or trading in combat in situations where the stat buff doesn't make a difference, then suddenly Omen Hawk is a 1/1 that didn't really do anything. That might sound a bit weird, but that's kind of like what I observed, and the theory how I like try to explain and understand what was going on. Fast forward to the version that we're looking at right now. This was a version that I tried and didn't actually had that high expectations for Precious Pet and Bond, but this version consistently has been doing really well and has been doing a bit better and especially felt better than the Demacia version. I think I tracked like 30 games with it and went a total of like 21-9, so a flat 70% win rate. The Precious Pets were surprisingly great. They are basically like almost better Navori Blade Scouts early on because they get more than one attack in a lot of the time, because Fearsome actually still is very unblockable in the early game a lot of the time. So Precious Pet basically being a pseudo elusive because it comes down early, and for the first few turns it might as well be an elusive a lot of the time. Sometimes better, sometimes worse. Like against the Shadow Assassin on the opposing side, it's better. Against like a 3/2/1/2, it's technically worse, but then again, if they're 3/2 for 2 trades with my 1-drop, that's not a problem. And Brothers Bond has felt better and been more impressive than Elixir. First of all, it's a bit more powerful of a card, and you get more impact out of it because you get to offensively buff 2 units for just 1 power more. So in those cases, it's sort of pseudo 2-for-1, especially because damage matters a lot. Like it lets you counterplay freeze effects. It lets you turn useless units into blockers against Fearsome. Like if you have a Kinkou that pulled like a pet and something else, you can just buff Wayfinder and the pet and shove it in front of 2 Fearsome units to help you win the race that way. Sometimes you can just go aggressive and early on use 2 floating mana to buff 2 Elusives, get in for 4 damage extra. It plays really well with Lifeblade, helping you race even more. And yeah, once again, I just felt like having this permanent, flexible offense buff does more for the deck than the temporary defense buff from Elixir. And yeah, this list just felt really good, and this is ultimately what I currently like and settled on, and what I would recommend. It has had the highest win rate, it played the best from just how the games played out, and made the most sense the more I thought about it and analyzed the games that I was at. So now let's just quickly go over the list, because I talked so much already that I don't want to like drag this on for too long before we get into the games. But yeah, basically we have 6 1-drops, and I think you absolutely need 6 between Conspirator and Wayfinder. So if you're splashing, you always want to ideally splash an additional 1-drop, because the other Ionia options aren't great anymore. Mentor is a poor splash, because if Kinkou pulls it, it doesn't do anything. If it would work with Kinkou, it would probably still make the deck, because it's still decent to get +1/+0 on a unit and get additional value from Conspirators. But since we can't, we have Pet. And I tried Sparing Student, as I said, alongside Hecarim, and Student was consistently very underwhelming, so can't recommend doing that. And I do think Pet is a lot better than Rearguard or Saboteur, because it has pseudo-elusive, so it gets this racy damage in early that you care about, while Saboteur just trades with all the crappy units you don't care about. And Rearguard has the problem of being really poor with Kinkou, since if you pull it, it's not a blocker, and you need your early drops to work as blockers or jump blockers later, and Rearguard can't do that, which is why Rearguard is much worse than Pet. And Rearguard actually is also worse at getting the damage in early, even though it gets more damage in when it does. And Pet just gives you the damage, gives you the jump block. It does everything we care about. Brothers Bond I already talked about. Then we have the 2-drops, Duo and Conspirator. Not much to talk about here. They're just what they've always been. Then on 3 we have Shadow, Assassin and Zed. Like I said, I believe despite Zed being not an elusive, he is sort of a pseudo-elusive given that he copies himself. That doesn't make him like unblockable, but it means in order for him to not be basically a 3-cost, 3-power elusive, the opponent needs to put 2 blockers in front, often losing at least 1 blocker, or sometimes even 2. And if they don't, he just randomly high rolls, flips, and wins the game, and there's blowout potential with buffing him with Brothers Bond and Disciplines if they try and kill him with a bigger blocker. So all in all, just a very good card to run. Just a bit awkward when you're on even sometimes, but even on even sometimes he can be better against certain decks, because then you can play him on 3 and don't give them an attack to react. Like on odd, what sometimes happens is you play him and then they play like a Protector or an Archer to freeze it, stuff like that. That denies you the attack anyway. But if you do that without the attack token on 3, it doesn't matter if they do, and then it's your turn on turn 4 and you can open attack without them having these sort of free roll delays on that, and they need to invest like an extra card out of hand that trades 1 for 1, and you already have the attacker. So that creates the scenarios that I mentioned where they take 3 or 4 damage and have to trade a card and mana to get rid of that, instead of deploying their board and their own game plan. And then Twin Disciplines, we are after all almost mono Ionia, so 3 Twin Disciplines are an auto inclusion over potential slightly more appealing options in other colors. Then we have Deny. I do run 2. I think that's the right number. There's a fair share of Ruination decks and other big spells running around, Harrowing, Vengeance, all that sort of stuff. Ironically, Deny in a way is better than before. Not in the sense that it's more powerful, but that it's better positioned, because suddenly people are running a lot more cards that Deny is good against than they used to. All these cards that have not been played at all before are now seeing play, especially Ruination being the big one. And my experience was that given that we are not super aggressive anymore, and these Ruination decks often playing a lot of like early stuff like Grasp, Veil, Avalanche, that sort of stuff, makes it really hard to pressure them enough and extend on the board to kill them before Ruination matters. And then you end up in this pinch situation where either you get blown out by the early stuff or you get blown out by Ruination and you can't really win. And I felt like against something like Shadow Isle's Freljord Control, if you draw 1 Deny, the matchup is really hard to lose. If you don't, it's really hard to win. So I would definitely recommend 2. And the card still has targets in most decks, so even if you're countering a cheaper, more marginal card, it's not blank, and it trades for a card and trades for some mana and might even generate some tempo despite being a bit unwieldy. Then 3 Lifeblade card is still good, just more fragile. The Wayfinder's sort of like the card that makes Hatchling even better, which is why it's even more embarrassing that I didn't run 3 Hatchlings, since even if you're like kind of struggling with board, sometimes on 6 without a tech token, you go Wayfinder, make 2 bodies, then on 7 you play Hatchling, and suddenly you have like 4 big guys attacking, and the opponent is jump blocking or like trade blocking against like your free Kinkou 1-drops. Will of Ionia, like I said, can also be a Refuge, depends a bit on what you're facing, and I'm still not 100% sure which one I like more. Will obviously lets you tempo some stuff like Hecarim, or lets you blow out something like Judgment, for example, or Dawn Dusk, where Refuge doesn't, but Refuge lets you protect your units, help you win races, help you beat aggro decks a lot more. So it's close. And Jewel Protector, Hatchling is just your top end. What I actually do a lot is just, if I draw my Conspirators later and can't get them into my curve, I play Protector on 5, buff my Conspirator on 6, play Conspirator, bounce Protector, play something else, and then, yeah, rinse, repeat, basically make a bunch of big guys. Works really well against slower decks to kind of wear them out and just drop must-answer single big elusives that they have a hard time dealing with, because anything that has more than 3 health in this game is pretty hard to deal with for most decks. So yeah, this is the list. Noxus over Freljord is what I would recommend. In the end, I felt like Omen Hawk and Elixir, as good as they are as cards, and they are 2 of the best Freljord cards and really good cards, have not been quite performing as well as Pet and Bond, and we'll see in the games how this particular version plays out. Yeah, that's it for the deck for now. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments. Hope this extensive rundown on background testing and all the ins and outs of variants is something that you guys enjoy. I'm trying to provide more than just, here's the deck, you basically know it, let's play some games, because, I don't know, you can find that a lot on the internet, and I try to share like a more unique and in-depth perspective with you guys and help you understand why a deck looks the way it does, and sort of, yeah, the ins and outs and the purpose of all the pieces, so you can also better understand the deck and modify it yourself. Because if you understand why it looks the way it does and what purpose each card fills and what alternatives there are, and also why the alternatives are in the deck over some other cards, you can later adjust the deck better to things you're facing when things change and so on. And yeah, that's what I'm trying to provide you with, the tools to fully understand the deck and then later work better with it and adjust it as you go along, rather than just be like, yeah, not really understanding why the list looks the way it does, and then making the deck worse by making bad changes because you don't understand the deck. All right, let's get into some games. So I'll see you in a moment with game number 1. Stay tuned.